Welcome to UNU. My name is David Malone. I have the privilege of working at the UN University, which is headquartered here in Tokyo, but actually works out of 16 locations around the world. We enjoy having guests here in Tokyo, and we have a terrific one today. Ahmed Rashid, the great Pakistani writer who continues to live in Pakistan, unlike many Pakistani writers who live elsewhere. And I last met him when I visited him in his home in Lahore 6 years ago. This evening in Tokyo, he will be speaking about Afghanistan, about which he wrote a terrific book a few years ago, the then current turmoil in Afghanistan, which has mutated a bit, but it remains a country in some distress. So, Ahmed, if I may ask you at the outset, what are the historical factors which, in a sense, predetermined Afghanistan drawing itself or being drawn to global attention about 25, 27 years ago?
Well, Afghanistan has always been contested territory. If you look at the 19th century, of course, it was the playground for the British Empire in India and the Tsarist Empire, which was expanding into Central Asia. Afghanistan was this buffer between the two great empires. And of course, later it became part of the Cold War. It was wooed both by the Americans and by the Russians. Eventually, the Americans dropped off because they didn't think it worth it, and the Russians virtually took it over. I think the other factor is that it's a landlocked country, and it's surrounded by 5, 6 neighbors today. There are very few countries in the world who have so many neighbors. All of them want to have their strategic interests in Afghanistan looked after. Now, these interests include ethnic interests, sectarian interests, economic interests, access to roads and each other's countries, etc., and political rivalries. For example, India has an interest in Afghanistan, so does Pakistan. Iran has an interest, but then its biggest rival in Afghanistan is again Pakistan. So, and thirdly, I think, the end of the Cold War, what we saw, and the horrendous civil war in the 90s, and then as a result of 9/11, what we saw was an Afghan political elite arriving at a consensus to rebuild the country. And these were essentially the former Mujahideen warlords, the warlords who'd been funded by the Americans to fight the Cold War. But then they coalesced and they became there was a consensus on electing Hamid Karzai as president and all the rest of it. What I fear now, after the Americans have left, or are in the process of leaving, is that this consensus of the Afghan political elite is now breaking down. And there's enormous turmoil and political unrest within the political elite. And this is perhaps the most dangerous thing that could happen to Afghanistan, because one thing they have always managed to do is to work through a consensus, whether there was a king or a communist or a democratically elected leader, they have always worked through a consensus.
Tremendously interesting, because I read the international press quite a lot, and there's quite a lot about Afghanistan, but no single writer has crystallized the problem in the way you have, of new diversity of opinion amongst Afghans. Now, you mentioned all of the neighbors of Afghanistan. 2 of them are not anymore contiguous. The former Soviet Union, now the Russian Federation, is not contiguous. And India, since 1947, has not been contiguous either. But both maintain a very strong interest. China is a contiguous neighbor. You mentioned Iran. The United States is a long way away, but at times has played a central role. So it is also, in a way, a cockpit for international competition.
Yes, absolutely. The latest big competitor is China, of course. China is offering to build this one road, one belt infrastructure development in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, roads, railways, oil pipelines, gas pipelines, etc. And Afghanistan it would be this huge transit bridge, linking up these pipelines across like this and north to south, east to west. And it could earn an amazing amount of money if this infrastructure was built. But of course, this all depends on peace. The Chinese are not going to build anything in the midst of a civil war. Now, on the other hand, you were talking about Russia. Well, Russia has left behind 3 Central Asian states who have direct access to Afghanistan. Now, they are very worried that militancy in Central Asia, a lot of the militant groups, are now based with the Taliban in Afghanistan. And there's this big danger that these militant groups will invade Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, or Turkmenistan in the near future. If there's God forbid, if there's a collapse in Afghanistan, these militant groups it'll be in their interest to then try and penetrate back into their homelands of Central Asia. And that's what they're scared of.
And China has parallel worries, doesn't it, about Uyghur militants relating to its own Uyghur population.
China has a big problem for the first time. The Uyghurs are the only ethnic group who are Muslim in China, or one of the few ethnic groups that are Muslim in China. And over the last 10, 15 years, a lot of their young people who are jobless, who feel culturally alienated, have come down south and linked up with Pakistani militant groups or with Afghan militant groups. And today we have a situation where Uyghurs are fighting in Syria, in Iraq, with ISIS. They're in Indonesia. They've just carried out a major terrorist attack in Indonesia. They're in Malaysia. They're spreading worldwide. And this is becoming a source of huge concern to the Chinese. And the Chinese are trying to dampen down this upsurge, in my opinion, in the wrong way. They're using very Stalinistic methods to try and dampen down religiosity in Xinjiang.
Now, you mentioned another important neighbor, which was off the Western scanner for quite a while, but is back on the Western scanner, and that is Iran. And India and Iran, as I understand it, have their own ideas about a port and road bridge to Afghanistan through Iranian territory.
Now, Iran is incredibly important to Afghanistan, and the way the Americans tried to ignore it during their occupation in Afghanistan, I think was very short-sighted. Because, half of Afghans speak Persian.
Yes.
The culture is Persian. They were ruled by Persian kings. So you can't eliminate Iran. Iran has, in fact, culturally perhaps far more influence than Pakistan does. So I think that's a very important thing. The other thing is Iran's natural competition has been Pakistan. Through the Soviet period, Iran hosted a alternative Mujahideen Shura, which was made up of Shia, largely Afghan Shias. And in the 90s, in the Civil War, it took a position against Pakistan, alongside India and Russia. So India has been a natural ally for Iran because India is also antagonistic to Pakistan. And now, yes, the Indians have given $500 million to the Iranians to build, half of which it is built actually, this Iranian port on the Arabian Gulf, Chabahar, which is very close to the Pakistani port of Gwadar, where the Chinese are building their port and road links. Chabahar is going to have a railway road which will take goods up all the way up to northern Iran and enter Turkmenistan. And once there, then they can be distributed all over Central Asia. The only problem with that road is it doesn't enter China. The Pakistani road goes straight into China, which is what the Chinese want, of course, and which is where the money is, in the sense of the big trade and all that. Because the Pakistani road, or the Pakistan-China road, you'll actually have goods which would normally go to Beijing or Shanghai to be exported from the coast. These goods could now come down this route and come to the Gulf and be exported from the Pakistani port of Gwadar. On the Iranian side, you'd have the same system, except goods would be coming from Central Asia, or goods going up to Central Asia. Now, the very sad thing, of course, in this is that the Indians have decided to opt for Iran, which means that India will have a sea route first. They'll have to take the goods from Mumbai all the way to Chabahar, across the Indian Ocean by sea, and then truck them up or ship or railway them up to Central Asia. Of course, the logical thing would be for India to cross the border with Pakistan and to be able to send its goods directly to Kabul across Pakistani territory. But the Pakistanis are not giving permission for that. And so, unfortunately, in this whole area where you've got so much going on of transit and states trying to come together and build bridges, you've got this huge wall of India and Pakistan where there's no trade, no business, there's hardly any coming and going. And that, of course, is very restrictive for the region's development.
So Ahmed, thank you so much. For those of you watching this online, it's just a teaser for the sorts of public conversations we have at the UN University, often about international relations, geostrategic matters, economic development, humanitarian crises, and these complement the scientific work that many of our research institutes do. Ahmed, thank you so much for being with us today in Tokyo.